They thought she'd be alone, that she'd sit quietly, accept the punishment, and disappear without making noise. But Zuri Carter had learned something early in life. Silence doesn't always mean surrender. She sat stiffly in the front office chair, her fingers curled tightly around a wrinkled pink slip that read, "Suspension, violation of dress code." Her braids brushed the edge of her shoulders, neat and professional, yet somehow considered a disruption. Her eyes were red, not from shame, but from holding in the words she wasn't allowed to say. Across the desk, Principal Whitmore read from a sheet of paper like she was reciting policy, not passing judgment. Her tone was flat, detached, like Zuri was just another line item on a disciplinary report. "We have standards," she said coolly, "and your hairstyle is outside those boundaries." Zuri didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked up and whispered, "My dad's on the way." The secretary sitting nearby rolled her eyes and let out a quiet, dismissive scoff, as if to say, what difference would that make? But just as she reached for the intercom, the front doors opened, and what walked in wasn't just a parent. It was a presence, calm, tall, measured, and from that moment on, the room would never hold the same weight again. He didn't storm in. He didn't raise his voice. He simply entered like the air had shifted to make room for him. Darnell Carter wore a crisp charcoal suit, not flashy, not loud, but precise, like everything else about him. He nodded once to the receptionist, then looked directly at his daughter. No words passed between them at first, just a shared glance, one that said more than policy ever could. Zuri loosened her grip on the suspension slip, and he reached forward to take it gently from her hands. He wasn't just a father. He was a civil rights attorney who had spent 2 decades in courtrooms where dignity had to fight for breath. He didn't come to schools unless it mattered, and today, it mattered. This wasn't just about a hairstyle. It was about the quiet violence of lowered expectations and invisible lines drawn around girls who dared to stand tall. He had always told Zuri, handle it with grace. Don't let them shrink you. And she had listened. She had endured. But today wasn't hers to endure alone. Darnell read the pink slip once, then again. His brow didn't furrow, his jaw didn't tighten. He simply looked up at Principal Whitmore with a kind of stillness that made the room feel smaller. Not angry, just measured. Because when you've seen real injustice, you learn how to dismantle it without ever raising your hand. She said it wasn't personal. That's what Principal Whitmore offered when Darnell questioned the suspension. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed something else. Discomfort, the kind that comes when a practiced script begins to crumble. "It's just policy," she said again, motioning toward the student handbook on her desk. "Hair must be neat, non-distracting, and within natural tone." Then she glanced at Zuri's braids and added, "Her style is non-compliant." Darnell didn't argue. He just asked, "Can you show me exactly where it says that?" There was a pause, a long one, the kind that swells when someone is bluffing and suddenly realizes they've been called. Whitmore flipped through the handbook too quickly, landing on vague phrases, outdated clauses, language meant to feel neutral but used as a weapon against certain students more than others. She stumbled through an explanation, using words like interpretation and discretion. Darnell waited. Then, with deliberate calm, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim folder. Inside were printouts, dozens of them. Names, dates, violations, hair types, and student photos. Same school, same dress code. Yet every suspension for disruptive hair belonged to a black girl. Every one. He slid the papers across the desk without raising his voice. "So, I ask again," he said evenly, "is it policy or pattern?" Whitmore's mouth opened slightly, as if to respond, but nothing came. She tried to pivot, mentioning student performance, professionalism, even preparing for the real world. But Darnell didn't flinch. He didn't let her change the subject, because the subject was standing right next to him, quietly watching the system try to erase her. And he wasn't letting that happen. Not today. The teacher in the hallway paused mid-step, one hand still holding a coffee cup, the other suddenly still. Through the cracked office door she could hear the tone, not loud, not hostile, but firm in a way that demanded listening. Inside, Darnell Carter wasn't arguing. He was reading, word for word, quoting Principal Whitmore's own emails, the ones where parents had raised concerns, where mothers had pleaded for clarity, and where those concerns had been ignored. The room was silent, except for his voice. "Your message to the Henderson family dated October 3rd. It's not personal, but rules are rules. Yet you never suspended the student in question, did you?" She didn't have braids. She had blonde highlights. Outside the office, phones buzzed. Word was spreading. Students started texting. "Zuri's dad is here. He's going off. Respectfully." One message read, "He brought receipts." Another, "It's calm, but she's getting cooked." A parent waiting in the lobby leaned forward, frowning. Then she slowly took out her phone and began recording, the lens angled subtly toward the door. Even the security guard, stationed by the entrance, removed his sunglasses and leaned slightly toward the office. He didn't move closer, but he didn't walk away either. The secretary, who'd been typing emails on autopilot, suddenly froze. Her fingers hovered above the keys as she listened, the faint sound of Darnell's calm cadence breaking through years of bureaucratic noise. For the first time, the office didn't feel like a place of power. It felt like a spotlight. And Principal Whitmore sat beneath it, visibly shrinking. He never said, "Fire her." He didn't have to. The crowd said it for him. By the time Darnell stepped out of the office, his daughter by his side and the suspension slip left crumpled on the desk, the school was no longer in control of the story. Someone had already uploaded a clip from the waiting area, his calm voice, the printed records, the principal's stammering silence. It didn't need editing. It spoke for itself. Within hours, the video was everywhere. The headline read, "Civil Rights Lawyer Destroys Racist Dress Code Policy. Live." The comments were ruthless. The shares multiplied. And by sunset, one phrase was trending across platforms: "Number, protect black girls." The school board released a terse statement by evening. "We are reviewing our disciplinary patterns for fairness and equity," it read. But it wasn't just the board under pressure now. Teachers, some quietly relieved, began coming forward. One tweeted anonymously, "We were told to enforce it this way. We knew it wasn't fair." Another admitted, "We flagged this months ago. It was ignored." Then came the final crack. A former principal, retired but still respected in the community, spoke on local radio. "I warned them this would happen," she said. "Policy doesn't always look like discrimination until you trace who it punishes most." The building hadn't changed, but the walls were thinner now, and the echo of truth was starting to reverberate through every hallway. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for correction. And some corrections don't just fix papers, they shake entire systems. As the office sat in stillness, Darnell stood. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at Principal Whitmore, who now couldn't seem to look back at him. Then, in a voice even and unshaken, he said the words that would be remembered long after the statement from the board, long after the hashtags faded. "You suspended my daughter," he said, "for standing tall in who she is. I suggest you sit with that." Whitmore didn't respond. She stared at the floor, lips pressed tight, the weight of consequence settling around her like fog. Moments later, the door opened again. This time, it was the district board representative. He hadn't waited for an official request. He had come early, and he didn't ask to speak with the principal. He turned directly to Darnell. "Can we talk privately?" But Darnell simply gave a polite nod. "Later," he replied. "My daughter's going home." As he stepped into the hallway, Zuri beside him, the students who had gathered outside parted without a word. Some leaned against lockers. Some stood with phones still in hand, not recording, but watching, bearing witness. A few bowed their heads slightly as he passed. Others locked eyes with Zuri, offering silent solidarity. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. She stood tall, not because she had fought, but because she hadn't had to do it alone. The system didn't bend because he yelled. It bent because he stood. 2 weeks later, without press or explanation, Principal Whitmore quietly resigned. No statement, no farewell. Just a nameplate removed from an office door that once echoed with unchecked authority. But Zuri's return was louder than any departure. She walked back through the school's front doors not as the girl they tried to silence, but as the reason the silence broke. There were no more dress code violations, not because students changed, but because the policy did. The language was revised. The guidelines were rewritten. And for the first time in that school's history, students were consulted about what dignity really looked like. Zuri never asked to become a symbol, but her story spread beyond those halls. Teachers used it in classroom discussions. Parents referenced it at PTA meetings. Her name was cited in articles, essays, and panels on equity. And Darnell, he returned to his cases, to his advocacy, but people whispered about him with reverence now, not because he had power, but because he had used it without needing to prove it. Have you ever seen dignity change a room without force? Would you have stood like he did, or stayed silent like the rest? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe policy should never silence pride, stay with us, because the stories we tell don't just speak truth, they make it law.